The following episode contains mature subject matter. Listener discretion is advised. It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Hauck, Episode 14, the film An Open Secret, and What to Do About Child Sexual Abuse in the Entertainment Industry, Part 1, with Matthew Valentinas.
It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Hauck. Turn your passion into income, Ben will show you how. With all the resources that you need to make it as an actor in an expensive city. To stay balanced and make money, you really can't go wrong with actingincome.com.
Welcome to the Acting Income Podcast. I'm Ben Hauck, and on this podcast, we talk about anything and everything that relates to earning an income as an actor. Thank you for listening. This is episode 14, titled The Film An Open Secret, and What to Do About Child Sexual Abuse in the Entertainment Industry, Part 1, with Matthew Valentinas. Take a moment and pull up the show notes right now at actingincome.com/episode 14. While you're doing that, here's a word from today's sponsor, the Stand-In Handbook. At Stand-In Central, we share what you'll expect if you've just been hired as a stand-in on a film or TV show. And if you're in a rush, people love our popular ebook, The Stand-In Handbook, for a solid foundation on how to be an excellent and effective stand-in. Since 2010, Stand-In Central has been the go-to resource for standing in on film and television projects. To get a deal on the Stand-In Handbook and also our downloadable call sheet cheat sheet, visit standincentral.com/handbook. That's standincentral.com/handbook. Today's episode is the first of a two-part series on the Acting Income Podcast on the explosive documentary An Open Secret. It covers the disturbing occurrence of child sexual abuse in the entertainment industry. An Open Secret came to my attention via Deadline.com, which recently reported SAG-AFTRA unsuccessfully tried to have the producers of the film remove all references to the union and notably its Young Performers Committee. I was compelled to see the film. I got more than what I bargained for. In watching the film, I was exposed to distressing tales of child sexual abuse at the hands of sexual predators, and the unique circumstances of the entertainment industry that support these grotesque, illegal, and evil activities. An Open Secret is an important film. If you're an actor, or if you're the parent of an actor, this film is required viewing. In this episode, I interview co-executive producer Matthew Valentinas. He provides unique perspective on the making of the film and what you and the entertainment industry need to do in the face of evident sexual abuse of child actors. In the next episode, and part 2 of the series, I interview former child actor and victim Evan Henze, whose story is chronicled in the film. In that interview, Evan provides deeper insight into his story and how he went about getting a conviction against his abuser. If you're a victim of sexual abuse, I hope you'll listen very carefully to this two-part series. And at the end of this interview, I'll play the trailer for the film. And now, my interview with Matthew Valentinas. Matthew Valentinas, welcome to the Acting Income Podcast. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
You are involved intimately with the film An Open Secret. Tell me about your involvement with this important film.
Yes, thank you. My original involvement stemmed from my relationship with my co-executive producer, Gabe Hoffman. We both attended New York University together, and we've been friends ever since. And I went to the film school, and I'm an entertainment lawyer, and Gabe sort of went the hedge fund Wall Street route. And one day he was talking to me about a really good boxing documentary. And then he was like, hey, I was thinking of doing a documentary. You want to help me do one? And I was like, sure. So originally we were actually looking at sports and boxing documentaries. And then a few weeks later, Gabe said, I've done very well and I'm fortunate and I'd like to give back. So I think I'd like to do a documentary that can help people. And maybe I'd like to do a documentary on women or children who've been victims of abuse. That was sort of the theme that we started on. So that was sort of a task Gabe had given to me. And he's like, if you can find anything interesting, I'm happy to maybe put up some funds and see where we can go with it. So for about 6 months or a year, I was pitching various people or just going to various producers for ideas. Initially here in Boston, I was meeting with a lot of producers. It's a pretty good documentary market, but I didn't really feel like I was getting anything that was new or fresh. And I also knew that we needed to do something that would be commercial and something that we could do for a budget that would be hopefully profitable. Profit wasn't our ultimate goal because 100% of any profits that Esponda Productions makes, and that's the name of the production company we created for this, will be donated to the Courage to Act Foundation, which is a charitable foundation we've created to help victims of sexual abuse in the entertainment industry. But we still wanted to make it profitable, so there would be donations to go to this charitable foundation. The reason we came up with this subject matter, particularly Hollywood, I had lived out there for years working sort of in business affairs. So I'd heard a lot of rumors. I lived up in the hills. I lived in West Hollywood. So I'd been around for a while. And when I heard Corey Feldman revisit his claims, I had heard them originally, but when he revisited them again around 2011, 2012, I reached out to his manager because now we were in a position to go to him and say, I know he was afraid to name names and he wasn't really doing any investigating on his own, but he had really taken that first step to say this is happening. And it seemed like a lot of people believed him, but a lot didn't.
What were those claims that Corey Feldman made, roughly?
Well, that pedophilia is the biggest problem in Hollywood and that it's so perverse and deep in Hollywood that people wouldn't believe it. And I would believe it because I heard some pretty crazy things when I was living out there about trips to Mexico for little boys and things like that. And I reached out to his manager, and his manager seemed very interested and had expressed that Corey might be partially interested. So that gave us the impetus to really move forward. And then at that time, it was like, okay, let's explore this and find a production company. And so this is about 2012, let's say spring, summer 2012. And that's when I reached out to Disarming Films because I had seen Amy Berg's Deliver Us from Evil. Amy
Berg is the director of An Open Secret.
Yes, and I thought what she did in that was amazing. And I really liked her directing style of, I'm a film school graduate, and I sort of like the old school style of letting your subjects speak for themselves without really having the director interject. And she really did that. And especially with pedophiles, I think she'd be great because obviously she handled one really well in Deliver Us from Evil. And I think with pedophiles, and now that you've seen this film yourself, you see that you just let the pedophiles talk. And I think the more they talk, the more they incriminate themselves because they don't believe what they're doing is wrong. And the more they try and explain their rationale, the more crazy they come across, at least to me.
I would agree with that. The people that you chronicle in the film, when they open their mouths, I gasp. Sometimes the logic that they have makes complete sense in some level, but then you apply it to the society that they're in and it makes no sense. Or it just sends shivers down my spine when I hear some of the reasoning that they have. Matthew, I wanted to ask you, in your words, what is An Open Secret about? I think in a general sense, we know it's about sexual abuse, but if you could sum up the story for the audience, what would you say the story of An Open Secret is?
This isn't just another film about sexual abuse. This is a film about the courage to come out of the shadows of sexual abuse. This is about overcoming the shame of sexual abuse, and the real shame belongs on the perpetrators. And there's strength in numbers for victims coming forward. And we can remove that. The more we remove the stigma of the shame, the more we'll be able to deal with this problem and educate people on it and have people look out for it. And I don't think we're ever going to stop it. But what we can do is we can really educate parents and young children. And if we can give them some tips on what to look out for, that we might be able to prevent a far greater number of these things from happening in the future.
Well, as a viewer, this is the importance of the film from what I could tell. I felt it was a bit like taking medicine, but I felt like it was very important medicine to take. These lessons I felt need to be shared. The difficulty of the subject matter and sharing it with children, I don't know how to climb over that. I don't know if you share a film like this. I mean, it's rated R, so I guess you can't really show it to a 12-year-old. But these topics need to be discussed with children and with parents so that they realize that these threats are out there within the entertainment industry, which you show and document in the film. These aren't just rumors so much. You show strong evidence that it is out there, or at least was out there by the time that the film was coming out.
We've seen enough information to realize that this problem is far greater than we're even able to show in this film. In this film, we're showing Michael Hara, who was, accused by one of our victims of trying to be inappropriate with him.
And who is Michael Hara, in case someone hasn't seen the film yet?
In the film, he identifies himself as the founder of, I believe it's the SAG Young Performers Committee. So he's a manager in Hollywood of child actors who also is on this committee at SAG. And his job on that committee is to really make the industry better for children. And here you have someone who's now being accused of possibly being inappropriate with children in a position of power at one of the major committees for forming policy on how children should be in the industry. So that's a long way of saying the problem is these things are falling between the cracks, because I think in a lot of ways the studios and the networks and the production companies are sort of putting this on SAG to take the responsibility for monitoring managers and agents and publicists who handle children. But I also think that SAG and maybe the parents are expecting that the network and the production companies and the producers are doing more than they should. And really, I think everybody is doing the absolute minimum. And I think that enforcement of regulations is extremely lax. I get the sense that there's really no cross-checking of records or background checks on these people. I get the sense that licensing, fingerprinting, I know they recently passed a fingerprinting bill for some of these people, is not being followed up. Even in our movie, Michael Hara says, well, I haven't even been fingerprinted yet. And here's a guy who's been in the industry for 30 or 40 years, who's on one of the major committees of the Screen Actors Guild, and he's a manager and he should be fingerprinted, and he hasn't.
And I should point out that he's no longer on the SAG-AFTRA Young Performers Committee. He resigned, and that's pointed out in the film. That was a point of controversy, I believe.
Yes, he resigned. I believe, we never got the exact date of when he resigned. The interview took place on March 26, 2014, and we were told he resigned within a matter of days, but we were told that several months later. So he could have resigned within weeks or days or months. We don't know. And that's a question I would like SAG to be able to provide.
Before, I'm not exactly sure of the timeline in the story, but I know there's an interview with one of the victims. He goes by the name Joey C. in the film. And there's a point at which he gets out what looks like an iPhone and has a speakerphone conversation with Michael Hara. That happened before the interview, Amy's interview with Michael Hara. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out how victims substantiate claims of sexual abuse. Did Michael Hara consent to the phone call with Joey C. when it was recorded?
With that, there's different state laws about, if you need consent or not. So where that phone call was coming from, consent was, I believe was not needed. So that's why we're able to use that in the film. To answer your question, how does a victim substantiate their claims? Both of these victims in our film only were able to do that with recorded confessions. It's so hard for them to substantiate their claims. That's why there's so few pedophiles actually convicted.
I talked to Evan before this interview. He recorded his conversation with Martin Weiss in a car and used that conversation and went to the police and played that recording. I don't know. I didn't get the chance to ask him whether that was admissible as evidence.
Here's the thing. I don't believe it was.
I don't believe it was either. At least that's my guess based on what I read, but I don't know the state laws. I guess I'm concerned. I don't know exactly where Michael Hara lives or worked, but California, as I understand, has a two-party consent law, meaning that both or all parties on a conversation need to consent to being recorded. So I guess I'm concerned that if there's someone who's the victim of a sex crime or sexual abuse in California and tries to substantiate the claim by recording a phone call, that might both not be admissible as evidence and might possibly subject themselves to, they might have done something illegal. I'm wondering, do you have any advice for other means for substantiating it, either from your experience working on this film or in talking to other victims or hearing from other victims and how they were able to substantiate any of their claims of sexual abuse?
They have to go to somebody as soon as it happens, I think, is the biggest thing. But again, that's another hurdle and major issue. And with this film, and we try and explain that, is that now the statute of limitations is, at 7 years. So, if you're like in Evan's case, he was abused at 11. And I think the case was finally brought by the time he was 18. that is extremely rare. For someone so young and courageous as him to bring the case forward and for him to come to terms with his abuse in such a short period of time is very rare. That's why I think you'll see in a lot of these cases, it takes 10, 20, even 30 years for people to really be comfortable to talk about these things. That's why I think you're seeing a lot of these Bill Cosby cases where the women are saying 20, 30 years later that, yes, this happened. And I think a lot of people are saying, oh, all these women are coming out of the woodwork. Why didn't they do it years ago? The fact of the matter is it takes people a long time to accept what happened and then to really have the courage to come forward. So the damage has been done. But in the few instances, like with the Brian Peck situation, he is an actual convicted pedophile who's in this film. He was fired from the job that he was convicted for because the victim's family came forward right away as soon as they found out. And that is why he was kicked off that show, rather than that kid telling us 10 or 20 years later what happened to him, because he went to his parents. So it's on the parents, I think, even more than the child, to look for signs and maybe to just constantly ask your child, is this happening? Because it might be.
You know, I think that's a huge impression that this film has left on me, the responsibility of the parents in this situation. And I don't mean that in the sense of blame, but that when it comes to these offenses happening toward their children, the parents need to be especially vigilant. And when seeing this film, you start to understand why. There was something you said earlier, too. Another thing that this film taught me is that the abuse may happen at a young age, but then they may start, years from then, start having problems, psychological problems coming up as a result of that abuse, though it's kind of a delayed reaction of sorts. Evan does seem like an exceptional case because he attacked the issue sooner than some others who do it either much later or never really address it.
Well, and the great thing about Evan, and it's been an honor getting to know Evan, and he's such a fine young man and a strong example of hopefully other victims will see what he has done and follow his path. He didn't fall into drugs. He didn't fall into alcoholism. And I think that's obviously the first step. He didn't lose touch with his family. He just had the courage to finally talk about it and confront it. So that doesn't happen in many of these situations, because another factor in this is the grooming and who they choose as their victims. So they're smart enough and sophisticated enough. They're like wolves who pick around like a pack of deer, and they'll pick the smallest, weakest one out of the flock. And that's why I think a lot of the victims that they choose, they do it not only because they know that they can sexually exploit them, but that they can mentally exploit them and mentally control them. And that's another aspect to this.
And grooming is mentioned in the film, and you just mentioned it now. What does that term refer to?
Well, grooming is really, and I think we see this clearly in Evan's case with Martin Weiss, is how they entrust themselves with their families, people who are important in the child's life, over a long period of time. And they slowly pull the child in, and they keep extending boundaries and seeing how far they can go. It could be weeks, months, sometimes it's even years. And if they reach a point where there's a parent who is more vigilant, or there's a child who's more adamant about saying no, then maybe they stop and they move on to another child, because it's never just one. It's usually a whole group of children that they're trying to groom, and then they just go towards the one who's the most susceptible. And that's been something I've seen with some of our more damaged victims, is they're still damaged today, and they were chosen because of how they could be manipulated. A lot of people say, well, that wouldn't happen to my child, or that wouldn't happen in my family. And maybe it wouldn't, but you have to understand not every family might be like yours. And there could be absent parents, or there could be a single parent, or the parents could be addicted to drugs, or the kid could be addicted to drugs and hate his parents. You never know. So they always choose someone that they can totally control. There's so many cases, and there were so many stories. A lot that we couldn't validate enough with factual information. It was more innuendo or hearsay, or someone didn't want to come on camera, or they wouldn't admit to it on paper. But what we saw was a lot of what in the 80s and 90s were being called drug problems. I think if you go back and look in Hollywood in the 80s and 90s, a lot of these teenage stars' deaths, heroin overdoses. Look at child stars who were 15 or 16, and then maybe by the time they're 24 or 25, they die, or late 20s, they die of some overdose after having a meteoric rise and then kind of a fall. A lot of them ran in the same groups. A lot of them got addicted to heroin, and everyone says, oh, it's the drugs that killed them. And what we're trying to say is, no, it wasn't the drugs that killed them. It was the sexual abuse that killed them.
The film did make me start wondering about that. Todd Bridges was an example of that.
And I remember in the 90s, you would say, oh, it's those Hollywood kids, they're just partying too much. They're party animals. They're addicted to drugs. And you think it's their fault. But no, they are introduced to drugs at a young age. They purposely are made to be addicted to drugs by some of these pedophiles at a young age. And that's hard to shake. And then these pedophiles are controlling them mentally. They're controlling them with drugs. And on top of it, they're controlling their careers. So now you're trapped. And then also, what else are you going to do if you're an actor? A lot of actors don't have any other job skills because they've been trying to be actors since they were, 8. And, most of them didn't go to normal schools, and they don't have a formal education. They don't really have any other job skills. So if you're like 23 years old and you were a child actor and you made some decent money, but, now you're kind of struggling and you're kind of stuck, Are you going to just quit and go back to school? Some of them do, but a lot of them don't.
Let's say there's a child actor who this evening was sexually assaulted by someone in the industry and wants to know what to do. Do you have any specific guidance? I mean, we can ask for the industry to provide more protection, but what does that child do? What's the next step to try to take action about this problem?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to go to their parents and then go to the police and then get a lawyer and then go to whatever organization hired them, the producers, the networks, and say, this happened to me, and do it as quickly as possible. Because once enough people start doing this, they can't not give everybody a job, because I know that's the fear right now. A lot of these people are saying, well, if I come forward, I'll never work again. And let's just move past that. Let's get the people out of the industry who would not give these people a job because they came forward about being molested. I mean, enough is enough.
Just a few more questions before we go. You have one victim chronicled in there. He goes by the name Michael E. And there's been some news around him that he's had a recent fraud conviction. He voluntarily withdrew some of his claims against other people. Does his credibility problem affect the credibility of an open secret, in your opinion?
You're probably a better person to ask than me, because I think 100% no. And the reasons why I think no are, one, I know far more about all of Michael Egan's cases than has ever been reported in the press. And two, all of us in the film believe that Michael Egan was a victim of abuse in that den case. The people that have been coming out against him, whether it's in the comment boards or certain reporters seem to have an agenda against Michael being in the film, when I hear that, that usually means they haven't seen the film. It's probably been the worst thing about this entire experience is just seeing how he's been victim shamed. And those who come out against him the most, it's obvious to me that they're trying to cover up the story of actually what's going on in Hollywood. Michael Egan is what they see as like their last chance of stuffing this all down the drain. But once people see this film, they can go back in a year or 2 or 3 from now, look at some of the things that have been said about Michael Egan, and I just let them keep firing away and saying what they want.
I share your opinions as an audience member. I saw the film, and then I saw the news related to him, and then I saw the film again. And I was watching the film the second time to see if, in listening to what he had to say, and whether that somehow undermined the stories that I was hearing on the whole. My answer is no, it did not undermine the story at all. In fact, from what I could tell, I thought what he was saying in the film, I don't know him, but seemed reliable to me. There's a limited amount of claims that he makes, and I'm not sure if that's by choice, if there was more that was edited out, I can't say, but it does not undermine the credibility in the story.
And all the claims that Michael Egan makes in the film are all from court documents based on the Digital Entertainment Network case. And those are all from, I believe, like 99 to 2003 in that time era. So when it comes to Michael Egan, there's a couple things going on. He brought his own lawsuit that we were not involved in April of 2014 against 4 individuals. He brought his case after he had already done his interviews for our film. Now, our film is about Michael's experiences in the Digital Entertainment Network when he was under 18 back in like 99, 2000. He brought a suit in like 2003 with a couple other victims against Mark Collins Rector, who was ultimately convicted of transporting sexual minors. That's what he's talking about in our film, and his recent 2014 case has nothing to do with our film. But people that want to come out and say, oh, Michael Egan's trying to use this film to, I don't know, I guess blackmail people into paying him off or something, that is totally unrelated to what we discuss in this film. And then recently, even after, he was just convicted, I believe, or he pled guilty to fraud in North Carolina. And that happened, I think, from like 2008 to 2012. And that was like a financial case that had nothing to do with us. So I would make it this way. It would almost be like if you had a victim of sexual abuse come to you and talk about their sexual abuse, and then they were convicted of a crime 12 years later for something else. Does that mean their sexual abuse didn't happen? And I would say they're not really related.
I hear you. And I remember the deposition, his mentioning, I think it was Mark R's deposition, that also lended credibility to his perspective, at least for me as an audience member.
Well, and if you see, I don't want to give too many spoilers away here, but I mean, there's a real motivation for Michael to be in this film because of his friend. That was really why Michael was in this film. And it's sad to see him get bashed for something unrelated to this film, because his speaking up in this film is courageous, and his motives for being in the film are good. And I know he's in a very tough position now, and I also know, he's made some mistakes, but I just hope he stays strong. And I believe ultimately, at the end of the day, I think people will see that what he says in this film is the truth of his experiences.
It's aptly called the Courage to Act Foundation. You mentioned earlier on, and it's referenced in the film as well, that the profits that Esponda Productions makes is going to the Courage to Act Foundation. I saw the web address in the film. I think it said couragetoact.org and maybe couragetoactfoundation.org. But when I pulled them up, I couldn't see the websites. Is the website coming soon?
Yeah, all the legal paperwork is sort of in the works for that, and then we're going to be funding it with the initial money to get it going. It's a donor-advised fund that will be operating under the California Community Fund. They run a whole bunch of reputable charities in Hollywood. So they're really going to be the ones who are running it, and they're just sort of going to advise us where the money's going to go, and it is 100% of profits. So the more successful this film does, the better that charity is going to be. I mean, ultimately, we'd like to make the foundation something that can exist for several years. And people like, I'd like to say a word about like Ann Henry of Biz Parents, when you said, where should people go? It's organizations like Biz Parents that Ann Henry runs and who worked with us in this film, who are sort of doing for the industry what the industry needs to be doing for itself. And I think the industry need to take people like Biz Parents, put them in an office in the Screen Actors Guild, and just have it as a place where people can go for situations like this.
I'll put a link to Biz Parents in the show notes. We're doing this interview in June 2015, and I'm in New York City. The film is playing at Regal Ewok in Times Square. Where else is the film playing? Where can someone see the film? And what are your plans for the distribution of the film in the future?
We just announced we're going to be playing it at a theater in the Village as well, because we really want that Village crowd to see it. So it's going to be in the Village for at least 3 weeks, I believe, starting maybe the 17th. So we're going to keep it in New York for another 3 or 4 weeks. It's staying at the Regal for sure. It's building momentum. And then we're going to be bringing it to LA, I believe, July 3rd. It might be July 10th, but we're going to be in LA in July, and we're going to be doing a really big push in LA. And also, we're really starting to reach out to more organizations who want to be involved in the film and want to get people to see the film. So I think that's going to be our focus for the next couple of weeks. Obviously, we're starting to get more smaller theaters around the country that are just saying, hey, can we show it here for a weekend? Things like that. That's starting to happen. And if we see that enough people are seeing it in theaters, we'll keep it in theaters, and we can expand up to probably 20 cities. We've just actually increased our theatrical team and brought on more people. We're also looking at releasing it in London in the next couple weeks theatrically. So that's kind of our next focus is LA, then London, and then spreading it further in the United States. My main goal this summer is going to be locking down a broadcast release, and then obviously having a digital release ready to go, because that's probably going to be our biggest. This theatrical campaign is almost going to be building word of mouth to get people to see it on digital. Maybe we get tens of thousands to see it in the theater, but we want hundreds of thousands or millions to see it digitally, because I think most people, this is something that they're going to end up watching at home.
I agree. I feel it's an important film. It should be watched more than once. I got a lot out of it a second watch. What's the website for the film?
It's an opensecretfilm.com.
An opensecretfilm.com. It'll be in the show notes. Matthew Valentinas, any last words you'd like to say before we wrap this up?
I would just like to say, if there are any victims out there that are listening to this podcast, feel free to reach out to us. We've had a few more already contact us. We're putting them in touch with different reporters. I think there's going to be more stories that are going to start breaking, and we can also put them in touch with organizations like Biz Parents who might be able to help them. We're here to help them in any way we can. And if they have no one to talk to, come talk to us, because we've heard from a lot of people. And that's what we want. As we're seeing more people follow us on social media and ask us more questions, it's more about getting more victims to speak out. I think that's kind of the direction we're heading in. So if there are victims out there, if something happened to you in the last 5 or 10 years, or something happened to you 20 or 40 years ago, talk about it. The more we can talk about it, the bigger momentum we can build, the more change we can make. And I think that's our ultimate goal. Our goal is to stick around as long as we can and sort of build this momentum as slowly as we can. And there's been a lot of ups and downs and a lot of challenges and a lot of people coming after us, but we're just going to keep plugging along until we know we're on the right side of this issue. That will never change. It's a good fight, so we're going to keep fighting it.
There is an issue, and there is help out there. And the film An Open Secret shows both of those things. Matthew Valentinas, thank you for talking to the Acting Income podcast.
Thank you for having me.
As I said earlier, the next episode in this two-part series is an interview with Evan Henze, a former child actor and victim whose story is chronicled in An Open Secret. You'll definitely want to listen to his interview. And if you've been the victim of sexual abuse in the entertainment industry, the show notes for this episode will point you in several helpful directions. The show notes are available at actingincome.com/episode 14. And now, here's the trailer for An Open Secret.
I think every little kid dreams about being famous and being in movies.
This is California. This is where you make it. This is where it all starts.
You'll get signed by a label. You can star on Disney Channel. You know, what kid wouldn't want that, right?
I remember you asked me if I ever did anything with a guy before. I was not interested at 12.
You're not recording this, right?
Like an angel.
Hollywood doesn't have any system in place to protect anybody, and children are way down on that list.
Children need management just like everybody else.
Walk like an angel.
Everybody liked him.
He became part of the family.
In the beginning, it was happy, and then things started changing.
Oh, you talk like an angel.
They pick on people who they know will be victims.
You have an adult who is manipulating the child.
Like an angel.
Getting, hired on the spot like that. That had never happened before. It was obvious that something was going on.
You fool me.
The party made me feel uncomfortable. There were lots of drugs available, and there were young teenage boys.
I remember being scared.
He just told me this is what you have to do.
A number of boys told me to point the gun at them just like that.
He said, "Do you not understand the power I have?"
You're the devil in disguise.
I remember sitting in my room and crying my eyes out.
He said, "What would you do? That happened to me."
A lot of investors completely denied that anything was going on.
Clearly, the studio didn't want an investigation.
I hate it when you tried to have me sleep in your bed and touch me.
I don't know anything about that.
There will always be a steady stream of kids who want to be famous.
We're absolutely talking about the tip of an iceberg.
It wasn't uncommon, let's put it that way.
For screenings of An Open Secret, visit anopensecretfilm.com. And that's the show. This episode was sponsored by The Stand-In Handbook from Stand-In Central. Download the ebook right now at standincentral.com/handbook. The show notes for this episode are available at actingincome.com/episode 14, where you can leave a comment on this episode. You can also find Acting Income on Twitter and Facebook. Rate and review this podcast on iTunes by visiting actingincome.com/iTunes. Pitch an episode idea by visiting actingincome.com/pitch. And if you'd like to sponsor an episode, check out actingincome.com/advertise. I'm Ben Hauck. See you on the next episode. And for more information, as always, check out actingincome.com.